Hi, everybody, from wherever you're joining us in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this Pandemic Punditry's mini-series, Marketing in a Pandemic. We are thrilled to have Charles Gold join us. He's going to talk about creating a category leader, a very sort of relevant area of marketing. And it also nicely dovetails with user experience that we talked about with Rick Varanasi last week. So let's welcome Charles. He's a four-time CMO, and he and I actually worked together 19 years ago. We just discovered it's been that long. So I'm very excited to have Charles on board. He's an expert product marketer. He is an advisor to CEOs and entrepreneurs. He's done a lot of work in category marketing and branding. So he's a complete package when it comes to marketing. And what is really fascinating about Charles is that he speaks on this subject a lot, and he is very much a business person's marketer. So he understands, this is not about the pretty pictures. It's a lot about sort of positioning your product to take over the world, right? And Charles has done that a few times. So we're really excited to have you, Charles. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, Charles.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
So as sort of a little bit of a context setting for our listeners, and we have a wide range of people joining us usually from all across the world, some of whom may or may not know much about marketing. And then certainly may not be as well versed as you are about category marketing in particular. So if you could just maybe take a few seconds or minutes and paint a picture of what exactly is category marketing, that would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, just to boil it down, a category is a way of understanding the world. So the way the human mind works, when you see a thing, you try to put it in a bucket so you can understand what it belongs to. That's what a category is. So when we talk about category marketing, we talk about where you fit in the world. To help your customers, your prospects, your partners, your employees, your board understand how to think about you. So the interesting thing about category marketing is deciding where it is that you want to fit, bearing in mind that the category is often in the customer's mind, right? It's the way the world thinks about what you do. And then figuring out how you're going to stand out within the category. And that's really all the category marketing is.
Okay, so this would be, I guess, given the sort of profusion of most of these new technologies and the fact that, marketing today, on the internet with digital marketing, there's a lot of noise out there. Everybody's, claiming to be various things, claiming to do various things. The chatter is at an all-time high. So is category marketing a way to sort of distinguish or give meaning to who you are and where you actually should be playing at? I know it's more than that, but
it is. It's fundamental to the success of literally everything else you do in marketing. So there's always in marketing circles, there's always a lot of talk about the latest marketing channel or how to get more out of Twitter or how to improve your search results or conversion rate optimization or how to get better PR or all of this stuff. But all of those channels are ways to get a message out. Unless and until you really understand who you are and how you're going to stand out, none of that stuff has context. And you can spend a ton of money getting really poor results unless you've got, who you are, how you're different, the problems you solve, all baked in. That's why this is so critical up front. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I talk to startup CEOs and founders, particularly, no offense to anybody on the call, technical founders, they want to get right to, but how are we going to get to the top of Google? Or, how are we going to do advertising? I want to spend money on Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads or whatever it is. And I always say, let's pause for a moment. Let's do a little bit of identity check. Who are we? What are we doing here? How are we going to separate ourselves? What's our message? Then let's go spend some money, right? Because that's when that money is going to turn from an expense to an investment.
So what you're saying, things like Twitter, Facebook, all those are means to an end, right? So, but the first thing to figure out is, what are you, who are you, and who is the customers that you're targeting? Why are you so important to them? What are the problems you're solving? These fundamentals at some point, right? Is that what we're talking about here?
Totally. It's sort of like if you said to me, hey, I've got this new company, I want to buy a billboard. I would say to you, cool, Lavi, that's awesome. What are we going to put on that billboard? Where are we going to put the billboard? Right? Who are we trying to reach? Because until you figure that stuff out, you've kind of got to, I mean, maybe it'll work, but I'd rather be certain, or at least more certain.
Sure.
Before you start spending money on demand generation or awareness activities.
But okay, so one of the questions, I mean, we had, the discussion is that, you know a category leader really well, right? I mean, because if you say alternative, taxis, Uber is the person, right? Airbnb, these are all sort of category leaders in their domain space, right? And one of the most interesting things in this book that you recommended that we read, Play Bigger, was that, some of the biggest companies out there actually started in the worst of economic times, which is what sort of we are in right now, right? So that's why I thought this would be a very useful conversation to have, given the reality of where we are with this pandemic, right? So, for example, I think Google was right after the the early 2000s when Google started, was right after the .com crash, right? Then Airbnb was in 2008 when the middle of the the financial meltdown, right? So Airbnb started then. Who would have been thinking that people would even travel in 2008 when everything was imploding, right? Similarly, I think even the very first sort of example that they use in Play Bigger was this whole, the Bird's Eye, and that the company Bird's Eye frozen food, that started in the middle of the Great Depression, right? So is there a connection between, or is in this particular time that we find ourselves in, is category marketing a lot more important? I mean, it's always important, but is it even more important now, Charles?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think there's two big reasons for that. One of them is strategic and the other one is tactical. From a strategic perspective, look, we're living in a really weird time. Like, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but it would be a really good bet that new categories and new category kings are going to emerge out of this. New needs that we didn't think we were going to have, either from a B2B or a B2C standpoint, are going to emerge. And the category kings that are going to dominate those categories are going to emerge. So strategically, it's very important for us as entrepreneurs to be thinking about, where are we going to land a year from now? Where are we going to land 2 years from now? Whenever we come out of this, and what's that going to look like? What new needs will have emerged, right? And choosing how you position your technology or whatever it is you're offering to take advantage of the market trends and to fulfill a need, incredibly important strategically right now. I mean, category design, category strategy is always important, particularly important in a market that's fluid. And right now, I would say basically all markets are fluid globally, which is something that, gee, I hope we never see again.
Right.
But that's what's going on. Now, tactically, it's important because resources are constrained, right? So, very few organizations have fat marketing budgets right now. And so having an arrow that you can shoot, really precisely at the target is even more important, right? So, understanding who you are, who you serve, how you're different becomes extremely important because you can't afford any waste.
Right. And so how would okay, so let's sort of ask a lot of sort of a philosophical question, maybe, or a conceptual question.
Yeah.
So so you have a finite amount of categories, I'm assuming. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then how could companies, let's say you're a startup, you're doing sort of a green field. Then yes, I can see somebody saying, okay, here's how I'm going to go, change the world. But if you're an existing business, been struggling for a couple of years, you're looking to sort of, pivot or do something different. I mean, can those companies also sort of remake themselves and position themselves in a new category? I mean, is this something that anybody can do, or is it just limited to certain companies with certain criteria?
I mean, I think anybody can do it. It really starts with three things, right? And like, forget about fancy marketing terms like category design. There's three things that you need to know about, right? You need to know what problems you're solving. And I don't mean world hunger. I mean like super concretely, what is the thing that somebody is struggling with that you're going to help them with, right?
Okay.
The second thing you need to understand is how you're different, how your approach to solving the problem is different.
Okay.
And the third thing you need to understand is what the competitors are offering, right? So, and competitors might be like another widget like your widget,
Okay.
or it might be doing nothing, or it might be solving a problem manually. I mean, there's lots of different ways. So rather than competitors in terms of another company, think about what is the customer's alternative. Always be thinking outside in. Think about like what the customer's mindset is, how they, when they wake up in the morning, they're not like, hey man, I got to buy me some more technology. They wake up and they say, I got a problem.
Right.
How am I going to solve it? You know, my budget's been cut. I laid off a bunch of people. Like, you know, how am I going to solve this problem? That's what they're thinking about. Put yourself in that mindset, right? So if you do that, and you really have a good understanding, then you can think, then you can start thinking about categories. And you can say, you know, what are the existing categories that are out there around what I do? And then you can say, well, is there, am I just another one of the vendors in that category? And if that's the case, then maybe it's time to be a little bit worried, right? But if you've got something that's different, you can start thinking about, is there a way for me to resegment this category, right? And say, okay, well, there's three ways to solve the problem. And within each of the three ways, there's a few different vendors. And in this one subsegment, we're the best because we solve the problem this way in the best way possible that saves you money, you know, allows you to go faster, does stuff you couldn't do before, whatever the set of properties are, right? So that's one way to think about it is there an existing category that you can resegment? The other way to think about it is, you know, is there a new category that needs to get created? Like, you know, you mentioned Uber and Lyft and all that stuff before, right? So that was a new category. I mean, they could have resegmented taxis and say, I have a better way to be taxis. But what they said is, no, there's like this other thing that's going to emerge. Okay? And the Play Bigger book talks a lot about creating new categories. That can be really expensive. So I have a little bit of a difference with the authors that, you know, they sort of think you should always be creating a new category. For me, I think if there's an existing category that you can play in and resegment, that's oftentimes more cost effective and more efficient, unless what you're doing is truly novel, like what Uber did. The one other caution that I will say for anybody on the call is, please never say we're the only people who do what we do. A market of one is not a market.
Right.
And you will wind up very sad.
Right.
So figure out, well, if the market might not be other vendors, the market might be other alternatives.
Right.
Like, so, you know, Uber didn't say, we're the only ones who do what they do. They said, look, there's a lot of ways that people need to get around the city. They can do taxis, they can walk, they can ride a bike, right? We have a new way of solving the problem, right?
Right. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, look, you might be the only player that sort of thought of it, approaching it in a particular way, but that doesn't mean that the customer, if you look outside in, the customer may have other options. So that is part of your competitive sphere, as well as the fact that you're not the only solution, right? So your solution is not narrow.
You have to open the aperture enough
Yes.
to be able to see the way the world looks at it. A lot of technology entrepreneurs, particularly technical folks, you know, they're so fascinated with their feature or the way that they've built the technology that they think is super exciting. I'm here to tell you the customer does not care at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, maybe one or two of them do, but the broad market does not care. They care about their problems and how you're going to solve them.
Right. So the I think that the another sort of sort of giveaway I had is, there is a seem to be a link between sort of user experience design, which was, sort of hot in the 2000s, and continues to be, and then category design, right? I mean, they seem to be intertwined, or an offshoot or an off ramp. Can you just touch a little bit on that? Because we had a speaker earlier this week talk about user experience design and the value of that. Are there linkages between the two, or do you see linkages between the two?
I mean, the main linkages I see are, category design. Like the Venn diagram that connects this in the middle probably is brand, right? So the brand is your brand is the way the world sees you.
Right.
The category is a way to sort of define your brand.
Okay.
A big part of the way a brand becomes experienced and becomes a real tangible thing, not some PowerPoint slide, is the customer's experience with it. Now, if it's a technology product, it might be, how they do a free trial. If it could just be your website and the way they experience your message. It could be your BDRs, your business development representative, when they're calling in to accounts, how do they tell the story? It could be your customer service organization or your customer success organization when someone has a problem or they're trying to figure something out. All of that experience is what makes the brand tangible, right? Like when people think brand, a lot of time, like marketers want to think about brand as being colors and fonts and that kind of thing, but a brand is experiential. And if you think about the brands you love, or the brands you prefer, if you don't love any brands, a lot of that has to do with the experience you have when you encounter them. The logo and the colors and all that kind of stuff, that just reinforces it, makes it memorable.
And I think you touched on a very good point there, which is this whole, even the BDRs, right? Even the salespeople and the customer support people enhance your brand, right? I mean, the way you experience your brand, as you said, experiential brand, and brand is an experiential exercise. Then, yeah, it makes sense that all of those things are sort of woven together and are projecting the same message, right? So I think some people, I think in tech, especially in the companies I work with, they put a lot of effort on the look and feel of their website and the collateral. But if somebody ever calls them up, it's a disaster, right? There's nobody picked the phone up. The follow up is terrible, right? Everything that follows is a terrible exercise. So you can project something to the world, but if you don't back it up with concrete, and I think this is where there's this whole idea of, if you're doing a category, it's just not saying you're in this category, but the whole company design has to be there that backs it up. You got to have buy-in. You got to have people focused on that. I think all of that makes sense, right? I mean, this is a holistic exercise. This is not a putting a lipstick on a pig exercise.
So that's a really important point, and I'm really glad you raised it. Category design is not a marketing thing. It's often led by a person like me whose job has marketing in their title, because it's our job to think about the market.
Right.
It's the marketing without market. But it's a company thing, right? So the product needs to align, right? The brand experience from how sales tells the story needs to align. When your CEO is asked in a media article, what do you do, right? They need to describe it in that same way. Otherwise, you wind up, there's only so much, a company only has so much kinetic energy to spend, right? And if all that energy is spent going in one direction, you get great results. If that energy is spent going back and forth here and there and yon, at the end of the day, you will have spent a lot of energy, but you won't have made nearly as much progress.
And your customers will be equally confused, right? Because you're everywhere. I mean, they are trying to figure out,
That's
also a single momentum and not everywhere, be everywhere, right?
That's right. That's totally right. So I'm glad you raised it. It is a company exercise, and so when I've done category design for organizations, it's been an exercise that I've done with the executive team. So a lot of times, I would bring to the party a set of slides, a set of analysis, a set of recommendations, but it's a lot of hard work of discussion amongst the key stakeholders. And then once you're aligned, how you roll that out to the whole organization so everybody is telling the same story.
Sorry, Kathy, I've been monopolizing the time. I know you have one question.
All right. That's okay.
I think this is a 19-year gap in communication catch-up. Sorry.
That's totally fine. I figured once you guys caught up, I'll get my chance to talk to Charles. So Charles, one of the things we see a lot on LinkedIn with people with their CVs and everything, where everybody claims to be a growth hacker, etc., right? But I believe there was an HBR article early on, probably 10 years ago, where Eddie Hoon, he wrote an article saying that category creation is the ultimate growth strategy. I mean, and from everything you've said so far, it sounds like you agree.
That's right. I completely agree with that, right? So the growth hacker thing is one of those things that always makes my head want to explode, right? Because it's all good. Like, all those tactics are good, but they're only good as far as you know who you are, who you're serving, what their alternatives are, and why you're different. It all goes back to that. And then all of a sudden, all that growth hacky kind of stuff has context, right? Without context, it might work, maybe, probably not, but maybe. I'd rather have do the hard work to kind of figure it out and have that message drive the demand generation activities. And then growth hacking has context and it can work.
So category is really context in some sense.
Oh, totally. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
You said that much more articulately than I did.
Well, I'm just summarizing. I'm very good at that. I'm a sales guy, I simplify.
Let's take Netflix as an example, right? So obviously Netflix created a category in streaming media and they owned it. But part of them owning that was they were brave enough to sort of cannibalize their own business in a sense. So yeah. Why do brands lack the courage to create and design their own market category? Why are not more brands doing that?
It's scary, right? Like, what they did was really it's the innovator's dilemma, really, right? So if you've been doing a thing for a long time in a certain way and it's worked out pretty good for you, it's hard to say, you know what, we're going to do something different. It's even harder to say, we're going to do something different that might eat the lunch of the thing that I've been doing for a long time, right? It's hard to say when you read the stories about Netflix, because you read the sort of backward-looking chronologies, and well, it was always going to be about streaming. We just had to do this DVD thing along the way. Maybe.
Maybe.
Or maybe, history gets told by the winners, so you never know.
Let me ask you a question. If you were in that Netflix critical meeting where they decided to, let's say, cannibalize their own business, would you have voted yes?
I would like to think that I would have. And the reason why, the Netflix one is a maybe an easy example from the standpoint that if the technologies were going to come, right, someone was going to eat their lunch. It might as well have been them.
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, you can use the counterexample, the obvious counterexample, which is Blockbuster.
Blockbuster. Yeah.
I recently read that there is one remaining, and it's in Alaska.
Yes, I did read the same thing.
So why? Because they were afraid to eat their own lunch. The other reason why some companies don't do it is depending on their relationship with their investors, whether it be public investors, that's the bigger problem, or private investors. If you got quarterly results to live up to, you got to have even more courage to say we're really going to do something very different. Right. And I don't remember, but I suspect Blockbuster was public at that time.
Right. I mean, even the Eastman Kodak example, right? I mean, they never caught on to the digital revolution, so somebody else ate their lunch, right? I mean,
that's right.
I mean,
that's right.
There's so many companies that you could use to sort of make these arguments of companies that haven't actually created the category and gone for it, right? So is this something that companies should always be doing? I mean, even let's say companies been around for 4 or 5 years, should they do like a range check on their category? I mean, on a frequent basis, are we still in that category? Should we, are the assumptions that we made when we started the journey the same as we are now? I mean, is this something that companies should do, like a health check?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not that they should do it every 4 or 5 years. You should always be doing it. You should be monitoring the evolution of the category. It's a continuous process.
Right.
Because particularly, I'm a tech guy, so like that's what I understand. The tech landscape is always evolving. New players are coming in, new approaches are coming in, and so being able to really evaluate where you stand and adjust accordingly is extremely important. But companies do struggle to evolve. I often have conversations with people who are like, well, yeah, but what if this doesn't pan out, and what if this isn't a real change in the market? Important to understand that there will always be naysayers, and that taking the winning argument is always the one that comes from outside in.
Oh, yeah, I have a couple of follow-up questions, Charles. One obviously is when you talked about the winning argument, given that it's marketing's role to find the market, is it marketing's job to make the winning argument?
It's marketing's job to, that's a great question. And the way I would answer it is, I'm pausing because I want to be very precise in the way I answer this. It's marketing's job to surface the information and make a recommendation that the executive team, and if appropriate, the board, can buy off on. It's not marketing's job to always have the answer. It's marketing's job to get to the answer. Right? So, it's oftentimes I find myself in the sort of consulting job of being the process facilitator, where I'm just trying to surface the data and drive the process to a conclusion. Obviously, I've got an opinion, but my opinion alone isn't enough to carry the day on something as important as what category you're in, right? I need the buy-in of my CEO. I need the buy-in of my head of sales. I need the buy-in of other key stakeholders, and I may need the buy-in of the board if we're going to take a really big swing.
Yeah. So that actually leads me to a really nice follow-up question is that, and you touched on investors before also, how can you get the investors on board with something like a new category design?
So it really has to start, it has to, with most investors, it begins and ends with the data, right? So if you can present to them the opportunity and frame it up in the right way, and by the right way, that means having the data behind it, being able to make some reasonable projections about what it will mean for you financially, being very clear-eyed about what the investment is going to be in order to, resegment a category or build a new category or whatever it is you're wanting to do. That's the best way to do it. If it's anything but data-driven, the conversation can go any which way.
Right, that's true. So so the question would become, for me, that comes to mind is, I mean, from a tech company standpoint, some of this stuff seems really straightforward. In fact, maybe because you and I both have a tech bias, right? But if you're an FMCG company or a restaurant chain, you're a hotel, a garment manufacturer, right, a fashion house, blah, 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 is category leadership still relevant?
I believe it is. So in that Play Bigger book, I feel like I'm shilling for that book, but
you should get fees on that one.
One of the things that they frame up in there is that 80% of the market capitalization in any given category goes to the category king.
Yes.
80%. So if the market is worth $1 billion, 800 million of that capitalization goes to the leader in that category. Everybody else has to split up that 20%. Yeah. So you tell me where you want to be, right? And that goes in just about any category you can imagine. So yeah, I do think it's important if you're outside of tech. Again, tech is my world, but it seems pretty obvious that the category, like, that a Starbucks is worth more than a Pete's.
Right. So I think so. You could narrowly define your category, right? It could be a very niche category. So is there a relationship between this concept of niche marketing and category marketing? Are they sort of in tension with each other, or are they complementing each other?
I think they're complementing each other. When I think about a niche, I do, and again, my bias is always to think outside in. When I think about a niche, I think about a segment of customers that are served in a particular way, right? So for me, that concept plays very well with a category. And by the way, a category doesn't need to be huge. A category doesn't need to be,
Billion.
Coffee houses or something, right? It can be very small and you can still make a ton of money. In fact, they say there's riches and niches. There are.
That's why I was asking the question. So there is riches and niches, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Find an underserved market and serve them better than whoever's doing a crummy job.
So really, I mean, if I was sort of maybe summarize all of the wisdom that you're bringing forth and in the insights that you're sharing, it's a lot about using the category sort of to define who you are, your identity, right? What are you? Who are you serving? What, outside in, what is a customer looking for, and how are you presenting that in the best possible way, right? And then essentially, getting all of your company aligned across that category, right? So that you are aiming to be the category king. I mean, yes, we can talk about how big or small that pie is, but and as you're saying, it can be big or it can be very small, it can be very niche, but you are going to dominate. The idea is to dominate that category.
Right.
Within that parameter, you want 80% of that, right?
That's right. By the way, the other thing that goes along with that is that when you are the category king, you also have, depending on how you want to frame it up, monopoly power or pricing power.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that your margins are better. And if your margins are better, you have more money that you can reinvest. And if you have more money you can reinvest, you can pull further ahead, or you can choose other categories that you want to dominate. So this is a flywheel,
Yeah.
right? If you're the category king, you can charge more,
right?
Which gives you more money to reinvest.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. So obviously we're all talking about the Playbook book, and obviously Christopher Lockheed is one of the writers of the book. And I think recently in one of his podcasts, he'd said in a pandemic, some people compete in existing market categories, but legends create their own. Are you seeing any legendary marketing right now, Charles?
Would it be sad if I said I'm not?
Yeah, that would be really sad.
No, I mean, I just, to be completely honest, two things. One, I'm like pretty much in my own little world, and I'm pretty focused on building a category king of our own. But secondly, I think it's early on. I think it's really early on. I have talked to some companies that are doing some very interesting things that are taking advantage is the wrong word, that are seeing emerging trends that are caused by the pandemic, that are building products and business models that will serve them well. But it's so early to say that it's legendary. I don't know. Ask me in a year.
Okay. I have a follow-up question. You said, you mentioned you're busy building a category king of your own, right?
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us through a process of how you're building that category king?
Sure. So, I work for a network security automation company. There's a number of other companies that are in our category. We are in the process of resegmenting that category to focus much more on where we see the market going. So we see the market going much more towards agile and cloud. And so we're positioning ourselves as being the only agile company in our meta category. We believe that we've got the functionality and the capabilities to deliver on that category king kind of promise. And so we're pushing very hard in that direction. And so we're early in that journey, but really optimistic about where that goes.
I just wanted to quickly clarify a point you made earlier. You said to say only is not something you should do, but in this case, a category king is sort of only. Is it? Is that because I just want to make sure there was no contradiction in what you gave earlier.
Yeah. So if you're saying you're the only one who solves a problem, then it might not actually be a problem. If you're saying you're the only one who solves a problem in a particular way, you're the category king.
Got it.
Got it.
Or you can be. You have the potential to be.
Got it. Okay. So we're all tech people, and we've talked a bit about some of the older examples. But one of the newer examples that people obviously quote is how HubSpot built the inbound category. Charles, do you have any thoughts on that?
It was brilliant. Right. I thought part of what they did that was brilliant was in the way that they executed on the strategy. So by sort of framing up that they were the kings of inbound, and then building a bunch of content that drove people inbound, they're both it's both self-referential,
yeah,
and self-reinforcing, as well as they allowed themselves to educate people on what it meant to be an inbound marketer, to get inbound marketing certified, to get all this stuff, right? To where they became synonymous with that category, right?
Yeah, brilliant. I agree with them.
Moving out of tech a little bit, let's talk about Elon Musk. So he's obviously, built categories several times over. What is it about him that allows him to go do that?
I mean, well, certainly there's some personality elements there.
Yeah.
I think he is a guy who he has a lot of vision, right? And he's able to sort of see the resonant themes that are going to matter to people, and then to drive really, really hard internally with his teams to do things that are different, and then frankly to be flamboyant, in the market, and to be bold in some of his claims, which, by the way, have a double-edged sword sometimes for him. Right. And so you do get some brand value from a founder or a CEO who's willing to be, kind of that out there.
Yeah. Very much like Mark Benioff of Salesforce, right? I mean, he was also constantly out there, right? I mean, pushing his brand and his vision.
That's right. That's right.
So that's really interesting for me, because I think it's something that I never considered. Lavi, and you should chime in here, is that so there are specific leadership traits, it sounds like, in a CEO or a founder that is required to fundamentally then or ultimately end up becoming, for that company to become a category king.
So I'm not, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was going to sort of give a counterpoint to that one with the VMware example, right? So they sort of stumbled on this whole, virtualization. They had no idea, right? And they were scientists in some sense, right? Techies. And then it suddenly sort of, the light bulb started to go off as people started to download their free version, that, whoa, we may have a business, right? So, sometimes you have a visionary saying, hey, we're going to go to Mars, right? And then sometimes people sort of come up with something and they don't even know that till sort of, a light shines on them. And there are also examples of people who come up with stuff that could be a category leader, but they don't spend the time to do the category design, right? And then it pans out to be nothing, right?
I guess what I would say is it's not a necessary condition to have a CEO or a leader at the top like that. It can be an accelerant. It can help, but I don't necessarily think that's required.
Yeah. Okay. So there's only a limited number of Steve Jobses and Elon Musk around.
Well, and you can have bluster without substance, right? And that isn't always helpful.
So Charles, in the last sort of 3, 4, 5 minutes we have left, if you were a sort of a startup anywhere in the world and they're sort of, wringing their hands going, oh my God, what do we make sense of this new world? Everything seems to have been upended. And, how can I become a category leader? Because I'm basically trying to keep my head above water. Yeah, I think I have a good idea. I mean, should startups sort of in its early days sort of figure out what category they are and say, hey, look, this, when you do all the work in category design and you find out that, wow, actually, I thought I was unique, but I'm not. Then should they pivot, pick up or find another niche for them to go do something? I mean, is that a point of reckoning for them?
So it's like, I wouldn't want to be prescriptive, right? So I think it's very situational. But what I would encourage leaders now and frankly always to do is, take a breath, take a walk, put on your mask if you're going outside, but take a walk, right? And really think about the market you're in, and think about what assumptions you hold that you might want to question. Think about what customers or prospects or partners or whatever that you can use to sanity check. But that's an ongoing process that, a lot of times I meet founders who are very dug in and they're very confident about what it is they're trying to do. And I'd say that the entrepreneurs that I've seen be most successful are the ones that are not dug in, but the ones that are open and always questioning and really trying to really understand, and then tack their plans accordingly. That's not saying you need a strategy of the day, but it is saying, like, be open and take some time and get away from your computer and whatever you're doing and go for a walk, meditate, whatever is the thing you do to like clear your head. You'll be better. You'll be a lot better.
And really, it takes 6 to 10 years, right? I mean, for this whole thing to sort of happen, it's not like going to happen overnight, right? I mean, it's very few things in business is overnight, right? So, I mean, this is something that you do, you work hard, execute, and then you become a category leader. It's not something that you sort of,
No, most overnight successes take 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's why they said Zoom is a 9-year-old overnight success.
That's right. The conditions needed to be perfectly right, and when they were, man.
Yeah. So just to touch on one other point, Charles, which obviously we haven't touched on at all, is even in the Playbook book where they talk about obtaining the market insights, they say like it's kind of an intersection of a person's knowledge, passion, and a little bit of serendipity, right? So
a little bit of what, serendipity?
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Luck is a thing. But if you're open-minded and can see the possibilities, even at a time like today where there's obstacles all around, there's new paths to be had. But if your mind isn't open and you're not looking and asking the questions, somebody else is going to grab them. 100%.
Right. I mean, it's that whole poker analogy, right? Everybody's dealt a hand, and at that point, your luck is equal. I mean, some people may get a good hand, some people won't get a very bad hand, but it's how you play the hand that really matters, right? I mean, how you essentially play the odds, and if you improve your odds to good category design and good sort of business sense, then you'll win more often than you would lose.
That would be my take, 100%.
And just a final question from me is that I remember reading somewhere that category designers take advantage of existing cognitive biases. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Like, a large part, like brand positioning, category design, like we tend to think of that as something that we do. I'm going to brand this, but the brand or the position exists in the prospect's mind. It's how they see the world. That's why this listening and being open-minded and asking questions and talking to people is so important, because if you can uncover what people's biases are, and I don't mean bias in a negative sense, I mean bias in a, people tend to think this way, then you can position into that. and capitalize on the way people already think today. Changing people's minds hard. I like to say that, you know, most things aren't sold, they're bought, right?
Agree.
And if you're buying something, you're buying it because of the way you're thinking, not because, you know, somebody is, you know, hammering you with emails or giving you a talk track.
Right. I always said that, you know, salespeople should recategorize or retitle themselves as buyer facilitators.
That's right. I
That's
couldn't
exactly
agree.
what they should be doing.
I literally just had that conversation with our sales organization yesterday.
Well, there's a little LinkedIn article you can share, send from my LinkedIn to them, so it's all in there.
Cool.
But so what do you say to people who, you know, use this Apple analogy all the time, that, you know, the customer does not know what they want, we're going to tell them, sort of thing, right? When Steve Jobs is asked. So I mean, because you just mentioned something that was, you know, listening to the customer, and then the question is, they don't, like, you know, I think Ford was another person, right? If I asked them what they would want, they would have said more horses, right? Instead of the Model T, right? So I mean, how do you sort of bridge those two, you know?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say to you is there's not that many Steve Jobs. And and no offense to anybody on the call, but you're probably not the next Steve Jobs. Secondly, you know, what Henry Ford said is apropos, right? What they wanted to do is get places faster, right? And he gave them a way to do that.
Right.
Right. And so listening to them means understanding what their need is, not necessarily listening to the way they want to solve that need. Right.
So framing is important.
I mean, look, if you think about Uber, like everyone thinks taxis suck. Nobody likes taxis, right?
Right.
Like I don't know, I wasn't there, but I can't imagine that they were thinking, well, let me just create a different taxi. They said, what's a better way to get people around? And they figured out this two-sided marketplace thing.
Yeah, great. Karthik, you're done with your questions as well?
No, I actually have another question which sort of counteracts what Charles said. I believe John Rougeau of Flags and Frontier, he said in a recent podcast that if you're creating a new category, you have three choices. He said one is to try and fit your product within an existing category. And the second was, he said, ignore the category you're marketing in and focus on the product's features and benefits. Or three, create a new category. And then John went on to say option 1 and 2 don't work. What are your views?
I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong. You know, I don't think the only alternative for you out there is to create a new category.
You can just
resegment.
That's right.
I agree with Charles on 100% on that.
And by the way, like if you've got an unlimited marketing budget, which I don't think exists, but if you've got one, maybe you can create a whole new category, but it gets very expensive and the probability of success goes down.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, Charles, I think we're sort of at the end of your time, probably a few minutes extra. You know, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I mean, I think the three of us could talk for a lot longer, but I'm cognizant of your time and everyone else's as well. So thank you for joining us today. It was been an absolutely fascinating discussion. And so, I mean, thank you for taking the time to sort of illuminate us about a very sort of a very relevant topic, especially in the middle of a pandemic, which is category marketing. And then all of the wisdom that you passed on is completely applicable, I believe, to all of our listeners.
Awesome.
Karthik, anything for you to add?
No, just wanted to wish Charles all the best while he's building his own category game.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Look, I appreciate you guys allowing me the opportunity. I enjoyed the conversation and hope everybody out there found it valuable.
Yes,
Thanks,
I'm sure they did.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Charles.
Thanks,
Have a good
Charles.
one. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.